can talk about the issue of foreign affairs here. The can China keep rising? There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stories dealing with the cover story over on this topic. And I can honestly say that the long story short of this is that the Council of Foreign Relations is very much capitalist. And so they are concerned that China can't keep rising, can't keep its population happy, can't keep growing if it doesn't pursue additional market reforms. Now, as stated previously, say what you will about Council of Foreign Relations and Foreign Affairs, but this journal is very influential. And so people that make policy will be reading this and be like, yes, maybe that is true. Now, on the story with the... so one of the main things about this particular magazine, this particular issue, is that it focused a lot on how Xi Jinping has been developing kind of a cult of personality. The reason that they say that this has been happening is because one of the things that he did is when he took power was go on an extreme anti-corruption campaign. And when I say extreme, I mean, usually when a party tries to reassess itself and get rid of dead weight, get rid of corruption, it doesn't go nearly as far as Xi Jinping did. It was basically a clean from top to bottom. The Politburo committee used to have 9 members. After Xi Jinping took over, it now has 7 members, so that consolidates a little bit more power and a little less dissent within the committee, so it's more homogenous. Another thing that they did was that he cracked down on some of the rising stars of China when it comes to businesses. So they went after Jack Ma, they went after Tencent. Tencent, as you know, is the company that owns a lot of the mobile games that people play. I believe they are a controlling share. They have, I think, TikTok. I'm gonna go look that up really. Tencent Tick. Pretty sure that's true. Yeah. So it was owned by ByteDance and Tencent. So Tencent had ownership of TikTok and that sort of thing. And so these are mega companies, very much underpinned by the state, by the Chinese Communist Party, and the like here. And let's see. Just making sure. Okay, yep. Trump 2020. Okay, sure, Luke UVs. All right. But with these things, Xi Jinping was able to consolidate more power around himself. And after going through and eliminating rivals and for some legitimate reasons, others just to consolidate power, he was able to then mold the Communist Party in a way that was beneficial to him and his vision of what China should be. After Xi Jinping was able to run a successful anti-corruption campaign, he then eliminated term limits on his office, on the presidency. Okay, Luke. But so after he eliminated the term limits on the presidency, he then went through and started talking about the Xi Jinping method, or the Xi Jinping plan. And throughout the entire Communist Party, through education, through business deals, everything, they started pushing heavily the ideas of Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping very much looks at himself as a definitive successor to Mao, and sees him as important as Mao was to the Communist Party, to China in general. With that kind of level of self-assurance, he set out to do a whole host of things that people that pay attention to this program most likely know, but I'll say it anyways, such as the Belt and Road initiatives, such as the Chinese Infrastructure Bank, such as the Chinese Development and Investment Bank for loaning out money to other countries, for things like trying to more liberalize the Chinese economy to make it more dynamic, to make it more nimble, agile, in order to look towards the future and have the ability to get the benefit of being the first to market. One of the things that Xi Jinping had said was that, and this is paraphrasing here, it's not a direct quote, the person that will have the advantage in the future will be the person leading the ox. And in this case, the ox was things like big tech. So the big tech, but the future of tech. So things like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, high-speed rail, environmental technology, such as the ability to suck out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the ability to make solar panels, etc. And all these things culminated into what is considered to be the 15-year plan. And the 15-year plan is a very narrow window by Chinese standards to get to an end state goal, which is to have China be a major player, if not the major player, in a new multipolar world. Because China expects there to be expects that the American century is coming to a close, and that will give room for China to have a Chinese century. We're not even talking about Biden right now, Luke. I don't know what you're going on about. Like, this is a charity stream to raise money for anti-suicide and for veterans and pets. So if you want to talk crap, that's fine. You're not breaking any rules. But just know that you're only making yourself look bad here. So that is the long story short when it comes to the Xi Jinping's method of going forward. Sorry, I had to crack my back. And with all that said, there has been fits and starts to achieving this 15-year plan. Back in 2014, China tried to liberalize its banking sector, allowing the banking sector to make not necessarily riskier loans, but loans to more low-income people and to more adventurous things within the economy. When it tried to do that, it didn't really go like all the way because they were very much worried having a 2008 crisis within China with the amount of debt and leverage that was happening. And so they put like some controls on the amount of leverage that could be done, but by the standards set within China, it was a lot more. It was like 50% above the benchmark rate for a loan. And when they did that, they did experience somewhat of a run on the banks. And so that reform failed because they had to pull back because they didn't want their entire market to crash. When that happened, the market ran up extremely, it was like an extreme run. It was basically a parabola, right? It went like straight up and then crashed down. Now, while the economy has expanded really a lot since the fall of the crash that happened, the stock market itself hasn't went back to its it's still under its pre-run-up gains. So it's still lower than what we would expect from that kind of thing happening, say, in the United States. the UK, etc. And that's because of the capital controls that are happening. Another thing that they did was they tried to liberalize the amount of money that was left China in yuan through Hong Kong. And what they attempted to do was they wanted the yuan to be part of the baskets of currencies that underpin the International Monetary Fund's loan system. And they were hoping that by doing that, they would attract more foreign investors and they would actually get people to buy more goods from China due to the amount of yuan in general global circulation. They did this by trying to use Hong Kong. Now, when they tried to use Hong Kong, they at the same, like shortly after saying, hey, we have this system, you can, trade out yuan in Hong Kong. It's cool, whatever, right? And sorry, got distracted. And what they did was they actually pulled back from that because they wanted to normalize prices between Hong Kong and China. And so the amount of capital outflow from Hong Kong depleted its supply of yuan, and now there isn't as much on the globe, isn't as much yuan possible in the in the global market. So these are a host of things that Xi Jinping has tried to do in order to liberalize the Chinese economy, in order to make a great sort of push to hyper monetization. And that push from hyper monetization is focused around things like quantum computing and green energy and artificial intelligence. The first two, quantum computing and artificial intelligence, are of particular interest to China due to its security apparatus and its ability to maintain order within China. They look at AI as being a way in order to monitor dissent and quash it before it might happen. But not only that, AI and quantum computing might allow China to avoid what is partly happening to Japan with a demographic crash. Now, China, as everybody knows, China had instituted a one-child policy back in the I think it was late 70s, early 80s, and that led to a demographic bubble of people born prior to then, and taking basically out most of what would be naturally a future labor force within China due to that one-child policy. It also had negative consequences for the amount of men versus women in China, and I mean sex here. So with the one-child policy, a lot of families wanted to have boys because men in China still at the time it's still a very kind of socially conservative culture, and so men are typically the ones that take care of, or at least provide for families. And so there was also a sex crash. So there is a whole host of problems that China is going to have to deal with here by about 2030, 2036 or so, with with what they call the excess male problem, the pensioner problem. The excess male problem is that there's too many men, not enough women to create stabilized families, and so they're actually doing things like encouraging it's not bigamy, because bigamy is a man having multiple wives, but mendigamy, I don't remember the exact term, but encouraging women to have multiple husbands or multiple partners. That was one of the things that's happening. They've also done I guess you could say, good job exporting men to other countries in order for work. And these men are actually bringing back wives or, emigrating to the countries in which they work, seeking permanent residency and that sort of thing. You see this especially happening within Eastern Africa. and specifically Djibouti, where China is actually building a military base. And so that's the problem. And then the other problem is that the Chinese government still highly relies on social order or social obligations in order to take care of the elderly. Its social pension program is going to be underfunded because there isn't enough young people to fund the program for the old people. We in the United States might have had that problem had it not been for us millennials being born, we're calling the echo boomer generation. So we were able to have a lot of more money going into the system that might take out and permanently deplete its reserves. And so we didn't have that as big of an issue. Plus we have immigration. Immigration helps with that as well. But it was a concern also that was happening in the 80s. They were worried that the United States would have a demographic shrinkage as well. So there is that. And so with the push for those two big technologies, you have those two things where they're trying to not only secure the state, but also make the state more stable. And then with the third one being green energy, there is two reasons for that as well. One, climate change. So climate change globally is going to push everybody to want to get solar panels and solar panels, dams, alternate forms of energy that aren't carbon reliant, maybe alternatives to plastics, that sort of thing as well. And the second reason is that the internal climate in China is pretty atrocious. Now, with some fairness, there is a thing that happens every 2 years or every year or so with the sands of Western China being blown all over Southeast Asia. It's just a thing that's happened throughout pretty much all of history. So they call it yellow dust. There's been advisories ever since this happened, or since we knew as people that this was bad for your health. So there is that. But one of the things that's happened since China's hyper-industrialization and its uncaring, its lack of care for the environment, for pollution controls, and the like, is that this dust is also picking up things like heavy metals, carbon pollution, coal ash, etc., and that is contributing to the deterioration of health within China. When this happens with the dust, you'll see a yellow haze everywhere. And this gets picked up and goes as far as Australia. While I was stationed in South Korea, there was several days of advisory of not to go outside. So they actually canceled PT. They restricted people indoors. I think one time they actually canceled working entirely because it was so bad. But because of all the additional heavy metals and pollution in it, it's contributing to healthcare problems of its citizenry and the like. And so what they're hoping to do is that they can find ways to clean up the air as quickly as possible. They will also create internal stability and alleviate the very legitimate concerns of its citizens when it comes to pollution. So that is the long story short of the history of everything that Xi Jinping has been doing. We know that he's got the Belt and Road Initiative as well, and that sort of thing. And we discussed a bit about how China has gone and has tried to do some liberalization and pulled back due to some issues, and that sort of thing. And I think that actually covers the stuff of this particular this particular issue of foreign affairs actually fairly well. One of the things that is also been brought up in this issue is the concern that China's rise will cause a great power battle between the West and China. Another Cold War, if you will, but instead of the USSR, it's China. And the concern here is that if China is successful in its modernization, if it's successful in modernizing, if it's successful in bringing more and more people out of poverty, it will present a alternative to liberalization to the rest of the developing world. With that concern comes things that you'll see from, we'll just call them Max Blumenthal followers or what have you, but you see that people are trying to implicate that this sort of stuff that's going on isn't actually because of China, but because of a CIA plot to stop China from succeeding. That, in my opinion, is just straight bullshit, to be honest. There's too much business interest within China, and there's too much Western business interest in China. The Chinese market is going to be the largest market on the planet. It's got the most amount of people, biggest land space, most room for growth. More and more people are going to want to work with the Chinese government, as we have seen. The NBA, issued apologies for saying things out of turn for China, where somebody had said something about like the Uyghur genocide that's going on and that sort of thing. And yes, it is a genocide. Just because there is not mass murder doesn't mean you're not trying to erase a culture or fundamentally alter it in some way, which is also part of genocide. So if you don't agree with that, and you agree with people that don't know what they're talking about, but to go back to the great power thing, that actually does have concern for what is going on not within China, but between China and its neighbors. Now, China has been exerting influence in the whole Southeast Asia region, to include Australia. China has actually picked up some of the successful playbook of the Russian troll farm campaign and actually target it to Australia in order to ensure that its business interests are still maintained, its interest in the South China Sea is maintained, etc., and doing disinformation or psychological warfare, I guess would be another way to look at it, propaganda warfare, and to promote its interest. This is something that pretty much every government does to a degree or another. The United States has, the Voice of America program. It has Radio Free Europe. It sends aid workers across the world, not just for out of the goodness of our hearts, but also to engender goodwill and allow people and help make America look better. But as far as outright, direct media targeting, social media targeting propaganda stuff, that, it wouldn't surprise me that the US does it, but it doesn't seem to be as, what's a good word to say this? Prolific. It doesn't seem to be as prolific as what Russia and China have been doing. China specifically within Southeast Asia. Another thing that is happening within Southeast Asia from China is its exertion, or if it's showing its power within the South China Sea and establishing fake military islands. Well, when I say fake, they built artificial islands in the South China Sea in order to exert economic and political influence in the area. They've also utilized commercial fishing boats, tied together. We saw that, I think it was a couple months ago, where there was like 20 or 30, pristine fishing boats that hadn't been used, but they're out there and they were just trawling for fish. But that was done to, ward off any other people from coming over. Maybe it was being done to also spy. It could have been spy equipment on these ships, what have you, and the like. And that is very problematic, because the way that the South China Sea is that is one of that is the major thoroughfare for international travel on the high seas for shipping of goods across the world. So any good that leaves Southeast Asia, so Vietnam, China, even Mongolia, Laos, like everybody else under that, the Philippines, Australia, has to, New Zealand, has to go through this giant section of sea known as South China Sea. And if China prevents the free movement of goods from within that area, that has grand implications for the world economy at large. Additionally, this is a major fishing spot for every single country that it borders it. The amount of fish that is consumed in Southeast Asia is immense. People think that, people on the coast in America eat fish. You ain't got shit on people in Asia. You ain't got shit on them. They eat fish like every day. So that is a major source of food. It's a major source of economic activity. And if China eats into the fishing industry of other countries, then you are going to see tensions rise between those countries, not only between them and China, but between each other. So maybe the Philippines will have increased tensions in Vietnam because the amount of fish that are in the area is shrinking due to overfishing, due to China extending its illegally extending its economic zone into their areas, and then having to compete for smaller and smaller fishing spots. So that is also another problem. And finally, within the South China Sea, there is the issue of mineral rights. Despite the fact that climate change is known to be a thing by pretty much everyone, even conservatives in the US actually admit that it's a thing, but maybe we're not contributing as much to it, or maybe, don't tell me not to drill for oil, figure something else out. Whatever, right? Okay. But even though that's the thing and China knows about it, they still want to be able to drill for oil, be able to mine, and the like. And there is reason to believe that oil exists in the South China Sea, but beyond the economic exclusionary zone that is everybody's, that is off the shore of every country in the world. I believe it's 20 miles offshore is how the economic exclusion zone is. Actually, I'm going to look that up so I don't talk out of my ass on economic. Established in 1982, sovereign states have special rights regarding exploration and use of maritime resources, including energy production from water and wind. So it stretches from the baseline out to 200 nautical miles from the coast of the state in question. It is also referred to as maritime continental margin, and its colloquial usage may include the continental shelf. Sovereign rights, which refer to coastal states' rights below the surface. So so it's 200 nautical miles, not 20 miles off. So it's a very big swath. It's a very large swath of territory that is economically exclusive to the country in question. But if you expand beyond that, then you're buttressing up against other countries, and that's going to cause tensions and problems. So one of the other articles in this this magazine is called "The Plot Against China," and I'm going to actually see if I can pull that up. I can see that I've pulled this up online. I have a subscription to Foreign Affairs, and so I am able to get digital copies of this, and maybe I can share it with y'all. But it's basically how Beijing sees the new Washington consensus. Was June? Oh wait, let me log in. Ah, perfect. This is the correct article. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to read this on air. And yeah, it should be a decent time. Oh, I didn't set up my Chrome. There we go. All right. So this is one of the things that I like to do. I like to share, to be able to read full articles on air because it allows us in real time to interact with the article and me to comment to you all. So without further ado, the United States and China are embroiled in a contest that might prove more enduring, more wide-ranging, and more intense than any other international competition in modern history, including the Cold War. Like I said previously in this segment, there is worry that the tensions between the United States and China will lead to a second Cold War, but more problematic and possibly even a hotter war due to the particular situation that China and the United States see due to things like trade imbalances, due to America's commitment to Southeast Asia. So we're saying Korea versus North Korea, Australia, Vietnam, Japan, and the tensions that China has with those countries. And in addition to that, Taiwan. Taiwan is one of the reasons why. So this is how important China sees, Taiwan, Tibet, etc. These areas that it currently with Tibet it currently occupies. With Taiwan, it views it as just a break. It's a piece of itself. Taiwan was part of China. The Taiwanese government was established by the nationalist parties of China when it lost its civil war against the Communist Party. And so it looks as them as not only traitors, but also they want to bring them back into the fold. The only reason that hasn't happened is because of United States and Western backing, and China's own internal struggles. But those internal struggles are being fixed, are lessening, and so we are seeing that they are actually looking to bring Taiwan back into the fold. In fact, they've promoted the Taiwanese Communist Party numerous times in numerous elections. There was concern that one of the, I want to say this was back in 2014, that one of the major political figures at the time was actually a Chinese puppet and spy. So that's how things are going with Taiwan. So that's an important thing that should be pointed out. So in both countries, fears have grown that the contest might escalate into open conflict. In the past decade, the consensus in Washington has shifted decisively in favor of more confrontational posture towards Beijing, a process that reached its peak during the Trump administration, which exposed open hostility to China and vilified the Chinese Communist Party. The recent change in the U.S. administration has produced a different tone, but not a dramatic shift in substance. The Biden administration's interim national security strategic guidance, released in March, asserts that China is the only competitor potentially capable of combining its economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to mount a sustained challenge to stable and open international system. Many in Washington argued that this tougher, new consensus on China has emerged in response to a more assertive, even aggressive moves on Beijing's part. In their view, China has forced the United States to take a firmer stance. And everything that I said up to this article is why those things are happening. The South China Sea, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, also called the New Silk Road, its expansion into Africa, it trying to create a trade bloc that could rival the European Union or America's dominance in trade, etc. And then it's posturing towards the South China Sea, towards Tibet, towards Taiwan, towards Japan with the contested islands between Japan and China. All these things are building tensions, and understandably so, to be honest. But these are things that should be avoided, and in my opinion, if you can avoid it, which we can through peaceful negotiations, through diplomacy and the like, then that's what we should do first. But that won't stop the hawks in both China and the US from trying to ratchet up tensions in order to go into a more official and sustained open conflict. The CCP's official line remains that bilateral ties should be guided by the principle of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. As Chinese President Xi Jinping described in his first telephone conversation with US President Joe Biden in February. Nevertheless, just as Americans' views on China have hardened in recent years, and part of the reason that has hardened is actually due to America's internal economic strife, the stratification of the economy, and the idea is still very much that China took all our manufacturing jobs, and then if we just didn't trade with China, those manufacturing jobs would come back. That is not true. Manufacturing jobs would not come back to the United States. The United States still has too much. For capitalists, the United States cost of doing business is too high, particularly in terms of wages. It is cheaper to pay a person in China, but now Vietnam, Mongolia, Philippines, Laos, etc., it's cheaper to pay them and ship the goods to the US than it is for them to make the goods in the United States. One particular, the most prominent thing that we see in this is actually with clothing and fast fashion. Shout out to my wife, who's been reading a book called, I actually don't remember what it's called. And she's going to hate me for this. What was it? Books on fast fashion. It was published in 2012. I'm going to see what it's called here. Overdressed. So the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. It's a great book. It's really a fantastic book, to be honest, and everybody should read it. It talks about why fast fashion is bad for not only the environment but economics, and why it became a thing. It explores why fast fashion became a thing, why we own so many clothes, etc. But that is of a particular importance to this kind of thing, to this article, because we used to make majority of our clothes within the United States, and those clothes actually made the price of those clothes would make up like 30 to 40% of a person's budget on the higher end, and on the lower end, 20% of a person's budget. And that was like the budget over several years. So you would take a whopping, like, I don't know, at the time, we'll say like $600, $700, which was an immense amount of money back in the 70s, and drop it on clothes, and those clothes would last you a decade and you wouldn't do it again. So these are like, a lot of money was spent on clothes, and now we just buy like cheap polos and stuff from H&M that many people wear once, if at all, and then throw it away or donate it. And the putting more tariffs on things from China, fighting China over the jobs of manufacturing isn't going to bring those jobs back, because those jobs are now done in Indonesia, in Philippines, in Vietnam, in India. It's just immensely cheaper to pay people, very cheap wages to mass produce crap than it is to produce quality in the United States. So that is part of the reason why that these views have hardened in the US. There's also the fact that China is still blamed by a large portion of the US population for the COVID-19 virus, which is complete bullshit. China used its security apparatus and ability to control its population to, with the local officials, the local officials tried to keep it under wraps for about 2 weeks. Once it became obvious that they couldn't do anything, they sent it up to the higher ups. Higher ups came in, put the entire area on lockdown, and let the world know. So it was about a 3-week lag, and not because of the CCP, or at least not because of national CCP, but because of some lower party level CCPs. And those people got in trouble. They got in trouble. And what China did was actually, they set up like fake construction. They set up faked over, like they purposefully caused like a rock slide, or said there's a rock slide, and they completely stopped travel in and out of Wuhan and tried to have the virus burn out there. And it seemed to have worked to a degree. Like I said, to a degree. But after that was done, like, they let the world know, not after it was done, but while it was going on, they let the world know, and the world started looking at COVID. And so you can't really, I don't think you can really blame the Chinese government or China for the virus. At least not with any evidence that is known and credible. Not going to promote any fucking conspiracy theories on this program. Fuck you if you want me to, because I'm not doing that. Because there is no hard evidence that this virus was manufactured, released, even accidentally. So we're going to stop that right there. So there's no reason to blame China for that, but that is partly why those views have hardened. All right, I'm gonna take it. The conventional wisdom in Beijing holds the United States as a greater external challenge to China's national security, sovereignty, and internal stability. With good reason. The United States has a history of overthrowing governments it doesn't like. While China is powerful, it still isn't out of the realm of possibilities. The United States would try to foment a color revolution, which has been mentioned in previous foreign affairs magazines. Most Chinese observers now believe that the United States is driven by fear and envy to contain China in every possible way. And although American policy elites are clearly aware of how that view has taken hold in China, many of them miss the fact that from Beijing's perspective, it is the United States, not China, that has fostered this newly adversarial environment, especially by carrying out what the CCP views as a decades-long campaign of meddling in China's internal affairs with the goal of weakening the party's grip on power. Now, those internal affairs are things such as the one-child policy, what it's done to Taiwan and Tibet, what it's doing to the Uyghurs, pushing for liberalization of social issues within China, pushing for liberalization in terms of how the law is administered, etc. So that is why it's seeing that. And these are things that the United States and any Western government should call out other governments on. If one is for liberal democracy as a first order, as a first order moral imperative, then not calling it out, within reason. There's geopolitical ramifications for all this stuff, and you have to weigh the pros and cons of doing it. But not calling it out lets it fester. All right. So better understanding these diverging views of recent history will help the two countries find a way to manage the competition between them and avoid devastating conflict that no one wants. Well, the hardliners want it, but I get the point. It is not difficult to understand why U.S. officials see China as a competitor. Most analysts estimate that at the end of 2021, Chinese GDP will be equivalent to around 71% of the U.S. GDP. In comparison, in the early 1980s, during the Cold War, Soviet GDP equaled less than 50% of the U.S. GDP. Meanwhile, China has replaced the United States as the largest destination for foreign investment. Americans increasingly feel that it is in contest with China. The momentum is with Beijing. Now, this is kind of like the zero-sum thinking that a lot of people have when it comes to international trade and relations. One of the things that I actually agree with on maybe more right-wing economists and the like, such as Milton Friedman, is that trade is more, from a country-to-country perspective, is more or less mutually beneficial. Internally, those can cause issues, but it's not because of the trade necessarily. It is because of already issues that already exist within their host country that are exacerbated by free trade or any trade. And so it is up to the countries internally to manage those issues, to manage those externalities, negative externalities. And that is something the United States has not done very well, thanks to people like Milton Friedman. So that's why I agree with him maybe on the trade perspective on it, but I don't agree with him on economics, is because things like job retraining programs, things like welfare, these are things that Austrian economists don't agree with, the Chicago School doesn't agree with, and therefore exacerbate these internal issues, these internal income inequality, wealth inequality. And those things will be exacerbated if more jobs or if more goods are made elsewhere than internally. And, with that comes despair and that sort of stuff. So it's up to the governments internally to manage those things, and we need to do a better job of doing that. As China has grown richer and more powerful, U.S. politicians hoping to look tough, have harshly criticized the CCP and have played on public fears about the U.S.-Chinese trade imbalances. China alleged hacking of U.S. institutions, theft of trade secrets, illegal Chinese immigration, and illegally Chinese immigration. So these things are actually pretty true. So the trade imbalance, like I previously said, isn't something that is entirely entirely bad. It does have some issues internally that need to be managed. But the theft of trade secrets and hacking institutions, that is an act of, like, at least with the institutions, should be seen as an act of war. And with the theft of trade secrets, this is undermining competitiveness and is just general theft and should be considered illegal. And with illegal Chinese immigration, there's a whole host of reasons that that's a thing. Some of them involve human trafficking. So what I think should be more focused on is what they call them, what do they call, luxury baby suites, where rich Chinese people fly to the United States when they're like 6 months pregnant, get a visa to stay for 6 months, have the child here. That child's now a U.S. citizen. They go back to China, live and be happy, but they're able to access American schools and that sort of thing. And so they're able to have a tie to the US and use it to do things like hide money from the Chinese government, be able to attend American schools, be able to immigrate later. So those are things that are potentially issues. In 2020, President Trump repeatedly accused China of spreading the COVID virus, as I already previously stated. So we're going to skip that. Under Biden's official U.S. rhetoric on China has become less belligerent, but still reflects an antagonistic mood. So again, things like, well, they're like competing with us and there's too many jobs over there, that sort of stuff. China has an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world, Biden said at his first press conference in March. That's not going to happen on my watch, because the United States is going to continue to grow and expand. So one of the things here that should be mentioned is that China's population is ginormous. And just on the size of population alone, if China continues to grow at a pace of, let's say, 3% GDP a year, it will eventually overtake the United States simply because it's a bigger market. Now, that doesn't mean that the United States can't, manufacture high-end durable goods, be the exporter of the luxury goods and solar panels or high-end computers, high-end medical devices, what have you there. But it is important to note that this is probably an eventuality. And so it's things like investments in the United States that need to happen to prevent this from happening and having negative consequence on the United States. So, yeah. All right, let me see what the chat's saying. Nothing in the chat. All right. Now, what's up? So, suspicion of China is hardly exclusive to U.S. officials and elites. By last fall, a record-setting 73% of Americans reported holding a negative view on China, according to Pew Research Center. This may in part reflect a generational shift. Older Americans tend to see their Chinese peers as students or junior partners, eager to learn from American experience. Younger Americans, however, are confronting a far more assertive China, and they may be less patronizing and, in a way, less sympathetic to the Chinese counterparts. Meanwhile, the United States has witnessed an alarming spike in racial motivated violence and hateful speech directed against Asian people. And some analysts believe this trend is related to the worsening U.S. relationships with China. True. That is very much a cause of it. Again, they took our jobs is very much a contributing factor to racism in general. But again, COVID-19, people wrongly blame China for it. So that also is contributing to it. More than 5 million people of Chinese origin live in the United States today, over 3 million of whom were born in China. And prior to the beginning of the pandemic, U.S. colleges and universities hosted 400,000 students from the Chinese mainland. One of the reasons why this happens is because the Chinese, they pay full price for tuition. And so the Chinese people that come to the U.S. For education are actually helping subsidize poor people's education in the U.S. and, keeping cost relatively low because they're paying, while a in-state student might pay, $10,000 a semester, or a year for tuition. A Chinese student's going to be paying, $40,000 for the tuition of the college, and that allows, the more they attract there, the more things can happen, that sort of thing. Hey, thank you, Diet Sock Dem. Appreciate the follow. So yeah, we are. So if you're just joining us, everybody, we are doing a 24-hour charity stream. Need to promote that again. So as you can see at the top of the bar here, we are raising money for the Bob Woodruff Family Foundation, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and Austin Pets Alive. You can find details about why this charity stream is going on, as well as donation links from the Google document link that I am dropping in chat now. You can also type in !BWFF or !AFSP or !pets to get a private message link for you to donate to these wonderful charities, which we are raising money for, because that is something that we do here, and also in loving memory of Art Black. So back to covering foreign affairs. So these people and their communities they form have often been viewed as bridge between the two countries. Increasingly, however, their presence and the treatment they receive may become sources of friction. Again, racism is an issue. Stop being racist. You're causing tensions globally. In the United States, China's rise is a source of neurology. I don't know how to pronounce that. And anxiety. Unsurprisingly, in China, the country's growing status is a source of confidence and pride. As the world faces unprecedented turbulence, Xi told a group of high-ranking CCP officials in January, time and momentum are on China's side. Chinese officials seem to feel increasingly emboldened in confronting Washington. In March, Yang Zhiki, a Politburo member and a veteran Chinese diplomat, made headlines as a contentious high-level U.S.-Chinese meeting in Alaska, where he publicly rebuked the American officials in attendance for speaking to China in a condescending way, and asserted that the United States does not have the qualification to speak to China from a position of strength. In other words, we're doing better than you. You can't tell us shit. During the past year, China's confidence has been buoyed by a series of stark contrasts with the United States. By mid-May, the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 was roughly 600,000. It's actually higher. The death rate is undercounted by about a third. So it is anywhere between 600,000 and 1 million people have died due to COVID. And because not every death that happens is going to be known for COVID, and we're not testing every single person that dies for COVID or haven't been, so there's actually undercounting. With the fire, and not only that, there is the issues with hospitals being over capacity due to COVID, causing other people to die. So there's more death than that. With a far larger population, and had lost fewer than 5,000 according to government figures. I don't think you can trust the government figures for the same reason why we undercount. Our figures are probably closer to being accurate, but China is still a very large country. It did a lot of authoritarian things to prevent its spread, such as taking someone's temperature every time they moved from one location to another, and forcefully quarantining people. So there is probably a lower number, but 5,000 is not believable. In recent years, the United States has supplied a steady drumbeat of stories about mass shootings, police brutality, urban unrest, a degree of chaos and violence without parallel in China. True. And the controversy surrounding the 2020 presidential election culminating in January 6th assault on the Capitol by rioters attempting to overthrow Trump's defeat revealed a high degree of social and political instability in the United States, especially compared with the order and predictability of the Chinese system. Well, democracy is messy. That isn't an excuse for January 6th. January 6th should never have happened. And a lot of those people should be in federal prison. But, with democracy, more freedom, more degrees of not bad political instability, but there is going to be more than necessarily an authoritarian system. So there's that. Against this backdrop, many Chinese analysts highlight the political dysfunction, socioeconomic inequality, ethnic and racial divisions. They have those in China too. They have socioeconomic equality in China as well. and economic stagnation that plague the US and other Western democracies. They also point out the many developing countries and former socialist countries that emulated the Western model after the Cold War are not in good shape, and they note how Afghanistan and Iraq, the two places where the United States has intervened most forcefully, continue to suffer from poverty, instability, and political violence. For all these reasons, many Chinese, especially the younger generation, feel fully justified in meeting US pressure with confidence and even a sense of defiant triumphalism. Now, what is interesting about both Afghanistan and Iraq here is that China is actually heavily involved economically in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Hey, thanks for the follow. And Lox is now. Appreciate it. So they're actually heavily economically involved. Chinese business interests, mineral interests, and the like are within Afghanistan. A lot of the zinc mines are actually controlled by Chinese companies. Iraq, there has been expansion of Chinese oil companies. And so if they don't like the U.S. and its unstabilizing position, once the U.S. leaves, it's going to be their problem. And that's partly why China has actually did this to the U.S. leaving Afghanistan, because they don't give a shit about the amount of maybe women in danger or the budgeting civil war that is going to happen, but they care about their business interests, and they're worried that the Taliban is going to tell them to go fuck themselves. Just a little bit of tidbit. See, this is why I like doing these reading things. I can tell people more stuff. Underneath the recent hardening of Chinese views on the United States lies a deeper, older source of antagonism. In Chinese eyes, the most significant threat to China's sovereignty and national security has long been U.S. interference in its internal affairs, aimed at changing the country's political system and undermining the CCP, aka not being on the socialist side, not liking communists too much. America's overthrown several communist governments. So, again, not entirely out of the realm of reason to worry about. Americans often fail to appreciate just how important this history is to the Chinese counterparts, and just how much it informs Beijing's view of Washington. The CCP's rise to power in 1949 wiped out U.S. political, economic, and cultural ties to the Chinese mainland. In response to Washington's efforts to contain and isolate China, Beijing forged an alliance with Moscow and soon found itself directly fighting the United States during the Korean War. The only reason why, there's two reasons why North Korea exists. One, China. Two, McCarthy trying to go too far. So that is very much true. And it is a source of pride for Chinese people that little old communist underdeveloped China was able to push back Americans to the now demilitarized zone and stop Americans' invasion into China. At around the time, the CCP waged an ideological campaign to rid educated Chinese of the mindset of being pro-American, but fearing American and worshiping America. In the mid-1950s, the CCP took note when the United States and its allies supported anti-communist rebellions in Soviet-dominated Hungary and Poland. For the next 2 decades, guarding against Western subversion and preventing a peaceful revolution toward Western-style capitalism and democratization remained at the top of the party's agenda. Again, with good reason. Going back over. Isn't MacArthur the House MacArthur, not McCarthy. If I misspoke, I misspoke. Thanks for the correction, Diet Sock. Dem, that is true. It was MacArthur, not McCarthy. In the late 1970s, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening policy ushered in a dramatic political transformation and led to the warming of U.S.-Chinese relations. Commercial activities and civil society links between the two countries boomed in the 1980s. Closer ties, however, also fed Chinese suspicions that the Americans intended to sow the seeds of dissent in China and eventually topple the CCP. The U.S. media's intense coverage of the Tiananmen Square demonstrations in 1989 and the sanctions that Washington and its allies levied on Beijing in wake of those events confirmed the party's concerns about Americans' intentions. Now, this is kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecy things. So the Tiananmen Square incident it appears still to this day to be an internally Chinese problem. It was mass demonstrations against the Chinese government while opening up, still being repressive. And whenever there is a youth boom demographic, and in this case, this is the boomers. So these people, but a little bit younger than American boomers, because their baby boom, so to speak, happened later due to a whole variety of issues. The Great Leap Forward was a mess, to say the least. But they had a younger population, more people attending college and university, more and the like, and so that caused social tensions. And whenever there is looks to be a justified response to authoritarianism, democracies tend to support that, regardless of if it was caused by them or not. And so this might have been one of those confirmation biases things. Ever since, anytime the CCP has encountered political turmoil at home, it has believed the United States to be the hidden hand. The paranoia is woven into autocracies because they are extreme. Despite the amount that the way that China has changed since 1946, autocracies are actually fairly fragile. It takes one spark to set them off because of how generally repressive they are. And so you tend to get paranoid as a party in an autocratic system. In the late 1900s, in the late 1990s, after Beijing cracked down on Falun Gong, an organization the CCP identified as an evil cult, its leaders and some followers fled to the United States and established a stronghold there. And the U.S. House of Representatives denounced China's persecution of the group and its adherents. So the Falun Gong is the group behind the Epoch Times. It is a cult, but it's a weird amalgamation of like Christianity and like Chinese mysticism. And so of course the US is going to be like, religious freedom. Yeah. Despite the fact that it's propagandizing the United States right now with anti-Chinese sentiment, and it's a cult. So yeah. The United States has also hosted and given consistent support to a number of Chinese dissidents. In October 2010, Liu Xiaobo, a well-known intellectual and fierce critic of the CCP, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The U.S. House of Representatives congratulated Liu and called on China to release him from jail. It is widely believed in China that U.S. politicians pushed the Nobel Committee to award the prize to Liu. Chinese officials are particularly irritated by what they see as an American meddling in restive regions of China. In 2008, when a riot took place in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, again, Tibet is... China has basically replaced the cultural Tibetan hierarchy with its own version, with a modified version of communism. Of course, the people are going to rebel. You're forcing forcing them to do things that they're not used to. The capital of Tibet, the CCP saw the violence as intentional results of long-term U.S. support for the Tibetan separatists living overseas and led by the Dalai Lama, who was granted 9 meetings with U.S. presidents between 1991 and 2008. Chinese state media in early 2009 asserted that the Dali clique, has in fact become a tool for the U.S. rude interference into Chinese internal affairs and attempts to split China. In 2018, Tibet enacted a law that requires the U.S. Department of State to punish Chinese officials who bar Americans from traveling freely to Tibet, a move that China's foreign ministry condemned as grossly interfering in China's domestic affairs. Tibet isn't China. That's the thing. You've taken over a country that isn't yours. And this is the thing. This is what really gets me about the authoritarian left, the anything America does bad, but anybody else does is fine left, is that they will immensely criticize the United States for being imperialistic and say jack shit about Chinese imperialism. Now, you can say that America is worse. That is at least a legitimate critique. But to say that only America is imperialist and China is not imperialist at all is a straight out fabrication. China has got its eyes on places like Taiwan, Tibet. It's building bases in Africa. It is creating fake islands in the South China Sea, as I said earlier in this program, and everything of that nature. And yeah, it's one of those things. So it's one of those situations where, you see imperialization happening from a nominally left-leaning government. I don't know if you can call the Chinese government left-leaning. And so you have to deflect and say nothing's badly is happening. And that's essentially what China's doing here with its claim. More recently, the Western Chinese region of Xinjiang has become a major source of friction. Beijing charges that violent riots there in July of 2009 were planned and organized from abroad, and that the Uyghur activists in the United States, who received encouragement and support from American officials and organizations, acted as a black hand behind the unrest. In 2019, human rights groups in the United States accused the CCP of engaging in the surveillance and torture of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities, and of detaining at least 1 million people in camps in Xinjiang. In 2020, the U.S. Congress passed legislation requiring the federal government to report on abuses in the region. And in March, the Biden administration labeled China's actions in Xinjiang as a genocide and sanctioned Chinese officials in charge of security affairs in the region. Beijing has repeatedly denied the allegation and accused Washington of being obsessed with fabricating lies and plotting to use Xinjiang's related issues to contain China and create a mess in China, in the words of the spokesman of the Permanent Mission on China to the UN. Now, as I stated earlier, while I was doing a brief history wrap-up of President Xi Jinping, what is going on within Xinjiang and the Uyghur Muslims is a form of genocide. The camps have 1 million people in them. We have satellite imagery. We have, firsthand accounts from people that have fled or had gotten out, what have you. We have journalists that have gone to the region, infiltrated the region, and seen this firsthand. We have reports of of requiring Uyghur women to share housing with Chinese Han men, and whatever that may be. There hasn't been any reports of anything like mass rape and that sort of thing, but there has been this immense push to, thank you Spitfire 3666. Bro, want to talk? I don't want to talk Zionism right now. We're doing a charity stream now. But if you want to jump on later, we can. We have it scheduled for, let's see, open panels is scheduled, I believe, for call-ins. It is during dinner, so 5 p.m. today. All right. So, I'm sorry. I got to go back to, there we go. So what is happening there is genocide, and the reason it is genocide is because they're trying to culturally erase the people, and the camps are re-education camps, promoting fealty to the Chinese Communist Party, to distance itself from Islam. Some reports are that these people are being forced to eat pork, etc. So this is a form of genocide. Full stop. You don't need mass murder to be genocide. You need cultural erasure. Just like you don't need mass murder to do ethnic cleansing, you just need to forcefully remove people from one area and put them into another. So that's the definitions of genocide and ethnic cleansing. Now you know. Go out and correct people that don't. U.S. policy toward Hong Kong represents another long-running source of Chinese mistrust. In 2014, a series of street protests that came to be known as Occupy Central, or the Umbrella Movement, occurred in Hong Kong in reaction to Beijing's decision to reform the territory's electoral system. And reform is a polite way of saying this. They basically went through and said that only approved Chinese Communist Party people could run, and it's basically a vassal system there now, which was pretty much going to happen given the fact that Hong Kong was turned back over to China after being a British protectorate. But it's still one of those things where there was an agreement that this wouldn't happen for 50 to 100 years, and it's happening now because of Xi Jinping's narrow window to become a world power, or become even more of a world power, I should say. Beijing believed that the United States government and US-backed non-governmental organizations had helped stage the protest, and when protests flared up again in 2019 to 2020 in response to proposed changes to extradition agreement between mainland and Hong Kong, security forces cracked down, and the Trump administration levied sanctions on a number of Chinese and Hong Kong officials. In March, the Biden administration added additional sanctions in response to Beijing's imposition of a restrictive new national security law in Hong Kong. One of the things that was that led me to know that the counter protest in support of the CCP was astroturfing is that, and you can look this up, there are videos still circulating around this, was that there were warnings to businesses that had pro CCP leanings, or they didn't want to destroy businesses and stuff, and so people warned them that this was going to happen and there would be violence. 2, everybody was wearing the same thing, and it wasn't just the same thing. It was all white outfits with aviators and wristbands, and so that was a military uniform. And these were pro-Chinese Communist Party activists going to brawl with the demonstrators, busting some skulls. And that's what happened. And the reason they wore white is to accentuate the amount of blood and violence that was happening, to make it look as though they are able to wreck face and that sort of thing. And it was just so obvious that was happening that I'm surprised there was anybody that said that it wasn't. But of course, as you know, the authoritarian left will diminish anything if it's attacking China, but can help attack America. Basically, what I'm saying is, fuck Maoist, and they can get bent. Finally, no issue has bred as much Chinese distrust of the United States as the status of Taiwan. Talked about this, but we're going to go ahead and read it. For decades, Washington's One China policy has generally had the intended effect of preventing disagreement over the island from sparking a U.S.-Chinese conflict. But there have been many near misses, and the policy's ability to paper over tensions is wearing thin. In 1995, a pro-independence faction in Taiwan gained momentum. The island's leader, Lee Tong-hu, received a U.S. visa to visit Cornell University, his alma mater, where he gave a speech that irritated Beijing. In reaction, China conducted military exercises near Taiwan, and Washington sent 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the area in the spring of 1996. In Beijing's views, the crisis left little doubt that Washington would remain a major stumbling block in unification. During the administration of the Taiwanese leader Ma Ying-yao from 2008 to 2016, tensions between Beijing and Taipei subsided, but since 2016, when the pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party took power in Taipei, Beijing's stance has hardened again. China has steadily mounted political and military pressure on Taiwan to deter DPP from making moves toward de jure succession. De jure being de facto. Meanwhile, in recent years, Washington has begun to push the envelope jure, I think, is actually legal. Yeah, by right. So legally. My bad. De jure being legal. Meanwhile, in recent years, Washington has begun to push the envelope when it comes to Taiwan. In December of 2016, when he was president-elect, Trump received a phone call from Taiwanese leader Tai Jing, when, to congratulate him on his election victory, a conversation that provoked angry protests from Beijing, and was also criticized in America because these are some of the things that an incoming president an incoming president with more handling would, I guess is the way to say it, with more prep would know not to necessarily take this call, because it unnecessarily raises tensions with another power that you don't want to do as you first come into office. So it was a misstep. It was criticized here and in China. In December 20th, although Trump himself did not seem particularly focused on Taiwan, he signed a number of pieces of legislation aimed at augmenting U.S.-Taiwanese ties and bolstering the island's international position. In January, Biden became the first U.S. president since 1978 to host Taiwan's envoy to the United States at his inauguration. Days after, the U.S. State Department released a statement confirming Washington's rock-solid commitment to the island. So once tensions have already risen, once communication is already broken down, trying to push it back together becomes harder, and you set a precedent which other people follow. Now, the United States, as stated here, since at least 96, has been pro-Taiwanese independence, complete independence. So while Trump got criticized for taking that call, it might not have been that big of a deal, but it's still one of those things that we have no reason to believe he gave any thought to. The CCP believes that all these perceived U.S. attempts to foment dissent and destabilize China are part of an integrated American strategy to westernize, or Zaiao, I think that's how you pronounce it, and split up Benhua, China, and prevent the country from becoming a great power. So in their eyes, the U.S. is committed to containment strategy against China, similar to its containment strategy against the USSR. Beijing believes the United States was the driving force behind the color revolutions that took place in the first decade of the century in former Soviet states, and that the United States government has ginned up protest movements against authoritarian regimes around the world, including the Arab Revolt of 2010 to 2011. The CCP believes that those alleged U.S. interventions will supply a blueprint for Washington to undermine and eventually topple the party. The central government and Chinese official media acknowledge no distinction among the U.S. government's executive branch, the U.S. Congress, American media, American-based non-governmental organization, or American-based non-governmental organizations. Of course, so this makes sense. The CCP is an all-encompassing, all-powerful institution that controls everything. Why wouldn't a powerful country like the United States have a similar thing? Worldview be damned. The CCP views all American institutions and individuals that criticize or take action against Beijing as players in a well-planned, well-organized campaign of subversion, and the party brands any Chinese citizen or group that has in one way or another been backed by the United States of America's organization as stooges or political tools of Washington. Again, authoritarianism breeds paranoia. China does not censor itself, but wants to censor the rest of the world. Diet Sockdem. To answer your question, if you're still watching, the term astroturfing is basically a way of a seemingly organic mass movement or a movement against a particular thing being paid and created by an outside organization. So it's the opposite of grassroots. Grassroots means that this is from the ground up. These are things that happen naturally, whereas astroturfing, like AstroTurf, on a baseball field, is fake. It's not grassroots. It's not from the bottom up. Okay, so I'm going to read some of these comments. Just like how Mao destroyed Chinese culture and heritage. Yeah, that's true. That happened. China is the second most brutal regime after North Korea. I'm not so sure about that. There's genocides happening in other places of the world that are more intense than what is going on in China right now, like actual mass murders. Yes, God save Taiwan and Hong Kong. Good for you, Spitfire. All right. So China's reactions to perceived U.S. interference have hardly been confined to anger rhetoric. In recent years, China has consolidated CCP's power base in society and further restricted the politically incorrect information its citizens can access. And Beijing has sanctioned U.S. officials, organizations, and individuals whom the party alleges are working against China. So this is, how China has basically its own internet. That's the kind of things that it's talking about here. Its ability to block websites that make China look bad and contain within it its own version of Twitter, Facebook, etc. is very intense, and it does create and it does help manufacture consent. The vigilance against perceived U.S. interference from one part of a comprehensive long-term strategy safeguards CCP leadership, which also includes a number of laws and policies aimed at restricting the ability of Americans and other foreigners to encourage political dissent in China. Activities that the party sees as threats to its legitimacy and authority. The CCP has also stepped up its political education among cadre and the general public at home and its propaganda efforts abroad. So I don't know if this article is going to talk about it, but let's see, include a number of laws restricting the ability of Americans and foreigners to encourage political dissent in China. This includes proselytization, Christian proselytization within China. While I was in college, I had the good fortune of one of my roommates being a budding journalist and a very devout Christian who was actually interested in foreign affairs, foreign policy. And so he did a semester abroad in China. During his semester abroad in China, he was able to actually document an underground Chinese Christian church. Very Protestant. I think it was Catholic, actually. Pretty sure this one was Catholic. And he was able to what Christians called fellowship with them, which means, pray, get to know them intimately, and be invited into their circles and stuff like that. And it was a really cool thing. This was back in 2003. Since then, China has somewhat expanded the ability of religious organizations to exist, but they have to be approved by the Chinese Communist Party, and they have to have Chinese Communist Party aspects. With Chinese characteristics. Like we're socialist with Chinese characteristics. We're capitalist with Chinese characteristics. Well, we're religious with Chinese characteristics. And so they actually push this narrative that, dominionists within the United States are pushing to Christianize China because that's how they view this. And so that's an interesting thing that is not very closely looked at in talking about China and its relationships to the Western world, but it is a thing that actually very much exists. And there is reason for that. There was a civil war happened in China that was actually led by a cult leader that thought of himself as the brother of Jesus. And during, I want to say it was I'm not going to even attempt to say which era in China it was, but it is something that actually happened, and it's an interesting story, and you should look it up. Okay. What do we got in the chat going on? How old are you if your roommate was a journalist in 2003? Oh, so I am 35. My roommate wasn't a journalist. He was studying to be a journalist. And oh, I'm sorry. I said 2003. I'm sorry. I meant 2006. I graduated from college in 2008. I am 35. I'll be 36 next month. 2 orders, 2 realities. All right, we're going to wrap this up soon. All right, the U.S.-Chinese relationship revolves around 2 orders, the internal order that the CCP maintains in China, and the international order that the United States wants to lead and sustain. Until the current downward spiral in bilateral relations, which began in 2017, Washington and Beijing maintained an implicit understanding the United States would not openly attempt to destabilize China's internal order, and in turn, China would not intentionally weaken the U.S.-led international order. Within the framework of this mutual understanding, the 2 countries tremendously expanded their commercial and civic links to the point of interdependence. So again, supply chains are highly linked between the United States and China. Research and development, American universities, and the like are tightly interlinked, etc. So it's going to be hard to untangle these if that is the way things are going to go, and that's going to increase tensions on its own. Hopefully that doesn't happen. A stable world order Even though China is authoritarian and repressive, and we should admonish them for that, we don't want to go into open conflict. They also started to coordinate and cooperate on various global issues, such as counterterrorism and climate change. The implicit understanding has now unraveled, however, as the United States seems to determine to weaken the CCP, and China appears intent on defying U.S. leadership of global institutions and Western values more broadly. The prospect of a vicious cycle looms. To avoid open conflict, leaders in Washington and this is where it gets into the opinion and their recommendations. Leaders in Washington and Beijing need to accept the two fundamental realities. The first is the CCP enjoys immense popularity among the Chinese people. Thanks, propaganda. Its grip on power is unshakable. Thanks, security police state. Despite challenges at home, such an economic slowdown, an aging population, and an imperfect social welfare system, the party's role will remain unchallenged for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable being the next 20 years or so. Especially since Xi Jinping doesn't have a term limit he has to worry about. External pressures on China to change its political system are likely to be futile and might even backfire by promoting unity and inflaming anti-Western sentiment. The second reality is that the United States will remain the most powerful actor in shaping the global order. The country's problems are obvious: racial tensions and political polarization, socioeconomic inequality, and weakened alliances. Its strength, however, lies in its diversity, its culture of innovation, and the reliance on its civil society. Again, liberalism. This magazine's very much pro-liberalism. You're going to get that take. And those attributes remain unchanged. Many countries might be frustrated by Washington's hypocrisy, dysfunction, flagging leadership, but few generally wish to see the United States depart from the region and leave behind a power vacuum. Given these realities, both countries should abide by what the Chinese have long referred to as approach of mutual respect. Washington should respect Beijing's internal order, which has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and brought stability to the world's largest country, and Beijing should respect Washington's positive role in the existing international order, which has helped promote economic growth and technological advancement, and which has, in fact, greatly benefited China. The two countries will continue to compete in many areas. Which government serves its people better, which country will recover sooner from the COVID-19 pandemic and keep its citizens healthier, which country is more popular in the world, and so on. But they should refrain from competing over which country can level the loudest and harshest criticism of the other, which can produce the most formidable weapons. To prevent competition from becoming catastrophe, two issues will require attention. The first is Taiwan. The CCP regards the status of Taiwan as central to Chinese sovereignty and territorial integrity. The United States government views Taiwan through the lens of its international obligations and security interests. Both countries, however, share a common interest: maintaining peace. As the veteran U.S. policy makers Kurt Campbell and Jake Sullivan observed in these pages being Foreign Affairs in 2019, Taiwan is not only a potential flashpoint, it is also the greatest unclaimed success in the history of U.S.-Chinese relations. As a result of the flexible and nuanced approach historically adopted by both sides, If Washington sticks to its one China policy and refrains from openly supporting Taiwanese independence, Beijing will likely continue to seek peaceful unification with Taiwan unless conditions specified in Chinese anti-succession law, such as the Taiwan authorities unilaterally claiming de jure independence by removing China from the island's official name, push the mainland to use force. I think that's probably going to end up happening because it will be 100 years in 2040. That is a different culture at that point. Like, that's 3 generations of not being, of not being Chinese. Like, they're ethnically Chinese, but national identity is very much rooted in being Taiwanese at that point. And so I could see that happening. The second crucial issue is U.S.-Chinese economic competition, and the problems it presents are both broader and thornier than the Taiwan dilemma. Socialism with Chinese characteristics and the liberal international order appear to be increasingly incompatible. Even before the trade war triggered by the Trump administration, the pattern of bilateral U.S.-Chinese economic exchanges was becoming unsustainable because Americans had grown increasingly aggrieved over what they saw as China's unfair trade and technology policies. They are unfair. They are they are bad. I mean, you can't subsidize from the liberal economic order. You can't subsidize a section of your economy so much that you just dump it everywhere. Never mind, the US does that with corn. But yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. I don't think the US should be subsidizing corn that much itself. Like it messes with other economies when you are basically selling products overseas at a loss. The two economies have become so deeply intertwined, however, that economic and technological decoupling will incur myriad issues and foster unprecedented uncertainty. Okay, we're almost done. At the moment, Beijing is emphasizing economic self-reliance and ingenious innovation, at the same time that Washington grapples with rising populist nationalism, an impulse that expressed itself in Trump America First approach and now partly inspires Beijing's foreign policy for the middle class. Both countries are eager to increase their economic competitiveness and disadvantage the other. In reality, however, neither economy will thrive unless both enjoy a strong recovery in the wake of the pandemic. China needs to hasten reforms to allow for more foreign trade, investment, technological know-how, which is what the new Chinese mantra of dual circulation is about. Spurring domestic production and consumption, the thinking goes, would encourage foreign businesses to rely more on China's industrial supply chain and consumer markets and foster what Xi has called an open world economy. Embracing international economic integration will in turn buttress China's internal order because a booming economy should boost the CCP's popularity. China may continue to resist calls for remaking its political system, but it should abide by or adjust to international rules that will benefit its economy, aid social progress, and provide environmental security in the long run. The United States, for its part, should reconsider the possible consequences of buttressing the existing order. A truly liberal order would be more inclusive and take into consideration the values of non-Western countries and interests of countries beyond Washington's circle of like-minded partners. I don't agree with this. It's not liberal to promote and not criticize authoritarianism. That is realpolitik, but it's not liberal. The failures of U.S. intervention in Afghanistan and the Middle East should serve as sobering reminders of the limits of American power. America was not willing to do what was necessary to fundamentally alter these countries' cultures. For good, for better or worse, that was simply the case. That is a limit of American power. It is a very, very much a limit of American power, but I don't think that I think that's a non sequitur, to be honest. If the United States and China fail to manage their competition, the world will face division, turbulence, and conflict. The first step to building mutual respect would be to try to understand the roots of their mutual mistrust. If leaders in both countries can understand how the other side views the past, they will have a better chance of building a better future. Okay, so yeah, that is the long and the short of this month's episode of the Foreign Affairs Roundup. This is so every other month when a new foreign affairs magazine journal is published, we will be doing a wrap up of at least a couple of the stories from the cover and the like. So if you are just now joining us, please welcome everyone. This is the Crowdsource Politics. This is Crowdsource Politics charity stream. I am your host, Cypher here. We are raising money for 3 great charities today. These charities are the Bob Woodruff Family Foundation, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and Austin Pets Alive. You can find more information about these charities and the links and what we're doing today in order to make this as entertaining as possible and to raise money for good causes at the Google Doc link that I just dropped in the chat right now. Let's see. I am missing some, so I'm going to go and make sure I get some of the comments that came in while I was reading. Let's see here. Diet Sockdem, I'd prefer to get China in the direction of liberalism again. Oh, thank you so much for donating, anonymous person. I need to actually fix that. I don't want that actually going off while while we're having our stream debates that are going to happen at 2 and 7. So I need to actually get rid of that. So let me go ahead and do that really quick. Actually, I'll do that when we get lunch. So let me get these other comments first. Let's see. There's quite a bit of travel. Oddly enough, Cao Mingdong Chiang Kai-shek's party is more favorable to reunification. True. Let's see. Do you talk to other foreign policy people? I have. We did a international news roundup back in April, and it featured Dylan Burns and Brad from Turing News. It was a great international news roundup for the month of March, April, and it was a good time. You can actually find